Scott Burnside, ESPN.com here on the latest edition of Hockey Today, the podcast. We catch up with breaking news in Montreal with a coaching change there, and hear from Pat Maroon of the Edmonton Oilers and Jason Chimera of the New York Islanders.
Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
So, right before we came on the show yesterday, we found out about Draymond Green saying that he thought that Jim Dolan possessed what they call a slave master's mentality. We talked about it yesterday, but I feel like I've had more time to digest and think about it and take note of some of the reactions. And so, first of all, for those who are unaware, here's what Draymond had to say on his podcast called Dre Day.
This is Charles Oakley. Why is he buying a ticket to the game? If I'm not mistaken, Dolan's was owning that team when he was playing. It wasn't a problem when he was speaking out then. It wasn't a problem when he was protecting their superstars then. And so if it wasn't a problem then when he were doing it for y'all, why is it all of a sudden a problem now when he speak out on something that he don't like? And now you want to disown him from your entire organization. That's a slave mentality. You doing it for me, it's all good. But now you're doing it against me, or not necessarily against me, but you're speaking out against my organization. It's not good anymore. That's a slave mentality, slave master mentality. That's ridiculous. It was all fine and dandy when he was laying people out, taking fines.
Out Jordan, right?
Taking fines and all this stuff for your organization. But now all of a sudden when he says something that he feels, it's a problem. I disagree with that. I definitely think, like I said, that's a slave master mentality.
So, after that happens, the people, not so pleased about that. By the way, we'll be talking to Will Cain of ESPN at 5 o'clock Eastern on this topic. Will Cain will be on the Right Time at 5 o'clock. Not really. Like, that's going to happen. We're gonna do that, right? I'm actually curious to talk to Will. But I think there's a part in this that I think hasn't really been discussed and I think should. Now, I want to start by saying, I almost feel like I hate the way I feel by, feeling like I have to start by saying this. However, look, man, I think that what Draymond said there was wrong. I also think that this is where I think that there's a certain level of disconnect when it comes to what Draymond said, and perhaps why some people are a little bit more angry about it than others, at least on a certain level. Something I think that people need to keep in mind when they think about and understand NBA players. NBA players are very, very, very much so concerned with the fact that they don't feel like the people that own their teams respect them. Right, so you can talk about all the money that guys like Draymond Green make and everything else, but players do not feel like the owners respect them. If you look back on that lockout in 2011, went into 2012, the ultimate thing I think that it came into 2012 rather. The ultimate thing I think that we found out in all the news that came out and everything else, man. Players feel like the owners do not respect them. Now, you imagine being an NBA player and you've worked as hard to get to where you get, and you understand that you're the show. You're the reason that people show up in the arena. You can say the owners are so smart and everything else, but the reality is people are coming to see the dudes in shorts. They're not coming to see anybody that's in a suit. Right? They are not coming to see the name on the front. They are really coming to see the names on the back. They might love the name on the front, but if the name on the back doesn't mean nothing, chances are they're not coming to watch your team. And so for a lot of NBA players, they've been in these rooms and these negotiations and everything else, and they found out, man, these dudes do not respect us. They don't. They see us as guys that they pay to go out and run around and then bring the money back. But they do not respect us. I bet if you went around and asked every NBA player, a significant majority of them would tell you, no, we don't think that the owners respect us. And don't think for a second that these cats don't resent the hell out of that. Because one thing you got to remember is this is America. And you know what gets you respect in America? Cash. Like if you got money, you get respect. You got money, people listen to you. So now you imagine being these cats in the league and you got millions of dollars in your pocket and these dudes still don't want to listen to you. That's kind of the general attitude that you got about NBA players when it comes to talking about their owners, right? Ask them NBA players what they think owners have to say about them when they're not around, for example. They don't feel like they get respected. As a result, If you make millions of dollars and you feel like the boss still does not respect you, what do you think that boss thinks of you? If your job is to be big and strong and fast and then to trade on your body to then bring that money back. If you're in that situation, what kind of things would you compare this to? Draymond went with slavery. Now, again, I think that Draymond is incorrect. The reason I think that Draymond is incorrect on this one is the reason why I think a lot of white people have a serious disconnect when they hear somebody like Draymond say this. So I could say Draymond feels as though the players get used, they play, they go until their bodies give out, and then the owners discard them, and the owners don't care about them, right? I think that most white people listening to that are like, yeah, guess what? My boss feels the same way about me. Is that fair? Like, I think that most people hear that, and I don't think that they're necessarily wrong. The corporation has no emotion towards you. The slight difference is with basketball players or football players or any athletes, and I think the part that jars them is they wind up in this situation where people blow smoke up their keisters all the time, and the fans cheer for them and love them when they're scoring, and then they get booed and have all this stuff hailed upon them when they lose. They feel like they get used, right? That's just the feeling that I feel like a lot of these dudes have when it comes to talking about their place in the league. And what they feel like is, man, I can do all this, I can do all that. You can be so happy when I do these things. And then let one little thing go bad and you just throw me off to the side. And that's very often when people start making references to things like slavery.
Treat it more like an asset than a person.
That's the best way to put it. Thank you, Shannon, because that's probably it. They treat it like an asset rather than a person. And black folks feel like they're being treated like assets and not like people. The thought process is far more likely to go to slavery. I understand why white people's thought process didn't go to slavery, because they don't think about slavery nearly as in nearly as personal a way. In fact, when white folks talk about slavery, they try to make it as impersonal as possible. Translation, I ain't never owned no slaves. You see what I mean? Like, white people are always trying to divorce themselves from the legacy of slavery. Black people always feel right in touch with it. Always feel right in touch with it. And I know a lot of you are going to be like, well, slavery came a long time ago. It's been a long time since we had slavery, and everything else. Why do we still talk about it? The truth is, slavery still does have an impact on life now. And you can talk to plenty of academics who will tell you the lasting impacts of slavery. They'll do that, right? It's really hard to sell that point, though, when you're a basketball player in the NBA. And I don't knock anybody for having a difficulty in agreeing with Draymond on this, because, again, in this case, I don't agree. My problem with it is, and I told you this yesterday, my problem was, and probably always will be the audacity, and it is outright audacity for white folks to act like they the ones that get to be offended by slavery. You got to admit, that takes a bit of audacity to act like the aggrieved party in a discussion about slavery. Now, what people will typically say in those situations is that when you make a comparison of anything, and I mean anything, because they ain't found nothing yet that you can compare to slavery that white folks will pop up with and be like, you know what, I kind of see what you're talking about. But if you compare anything to slavery, the answer that you typically get from people, including Will Cain, who will join us later, is you have now minimized the impact of slavery. I see why you would say that. However, when people try to point to things about that directly do tie to slavery, you don't want to talk about those things either. So what's wound up happening with slavery is we've made slavery such a big thing, and we talk about it just in the context of how terrible it is. This is no different than when you get into an argument with your woman and you done something wrong, and she brings up that thing you did wrong, and you feel so guilty you just don't want to talk about it, even though you're the one who did something wrong, right? But we make slavery so big and we say it's so terrible, and any of these references minimize the impact of slavery, but those same people don't never want to talk to you about what the actual impact of slavery was. And so it winds up being annoying for somebody like me, because I hear people want to talk about how horrible slavery was only when they have a problem with the fact that somebody else mentioned slavery in the first place. You understand what I'm saying? So if slavery is so important, and that's the way it's broached in these topics when people come down on Draymond Green, if slavery is so important, then talk to me about why you think that slavery is so important. Talk to me about when the impact of slavery is appropriate to discuss. except the people who are saying that you shouldn't talk about slavery then don't ever want to talk about slavery at any point, and then pop up more offended by Draymond making a reference to Jim Dolan perhaps being a slave master, more offended by someone erroneously calling somebody racist than they ever are by actual racism itself. And that is how Draymond Green manages to be wrong in this, but so many of the people who are responding seem to be even more wrong.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
I asked a question before the break, and I'm just curious what you guys thought about this. Okay, so it's not really so cool to talk about, call James Dolan a slave master. Like, we get that. That's not the move. I don't think that Draymond Green was correct. However, are you allowed to call Donald Sterling a slave master? Or have a slave master mentality? Are you allowed to do that? Keeping in mind that Donald Sterling was alleged to have brought people to the locker room to watch his players shower and to look at their beautiful black bodies. Right? Given everything you know about Donald Sterling, is it okay to say that maybe Donald Sterling had a slave master mentality? I'm just curious because I do kind of feel like with Donald Sterling, if you can't say that he had a slave master mentality, you literally cannot say it about anybody else. Right? Like I once called my boss up about something I wanted to talk about on this show, and I'm a boss. He's not my boss, but he's boss-like. Anyway, I asked him about it, and he's like, well, we don't want to call anybody racist. And I was like, damn, well, we ain't never going to call anybody racist ever on this show if we can't call that cat racist. Right? Like, that's just kind of how these things happen to go sometimes. Bring it back, Mike. Anyway, Charles Oakley was talking to Sports Illustrated, and he was asked if he thought that Dolan was a racist, and he hesitated. He did not call him a racist. Shady did the next best thing. He compared him to Donald Sterling. Yes, he said, and I quote, Dolan's on the same level. The man has been around for a long time. I've never heard anything good about him. This is going to end up like what happened with the L.A. Clippers. It's that bad. He's definitely a control freak. He has everybody in the garden on pins and needles. The other owners know this. That's the bad thing about it. And I'm like, yo, bro, that doesn't sound like Donald Sterling. That does not sound like Donald Sterling. And it got me thinking about Donald Sterling. Chad, how racist you got to be where you the racist that nobody can say a word about when somebody says that you racist? How racist you got to be that dude?
You're the level. You're the line. Like we can go close to the line, but we cannot go to that Donald Sterling line.
Donald Sterling is so racist that the closest anybody could come to defending him when he played was, when he was the owner, after it happened was, well, didn't the NAACP give him an award? That was it. That and doesn't he pay black people millions of dollars? That's all they had. That's the only thing. But it's so wild. We're at this point with Donald Sterling where I think we need to come up with Sterling's law, right? Which is you can't compare anybody to Donald Sterling because we're at that point that comparing someone to Donald Sterling is like comparing someone to a dictator in a far-off land who may or may not have been in business roughly 70 years ago. Like, that's where Donald Sterling is in this whole thing. So Oakley will not call him a racist. He'll just say it's like Donald Sterling. Bruh, you might as well have called him a Klansman the way that people act about Donald Sterling. You might as well. But let me tell you something about whether or not Jim Dolan's a racist, because I think it's interesting that they asked the question to Charles Oakley as to whether or not Jim Dolan was a racist. Let me ask you a question. How much does that matter? Like, how much does it matter if Jim Dolan is a racist? And I asked that because, and we've talked about this before on this show, I don't really call people racist or get too deep into whether or not someone is a racist. The reason I don't is I just don't think there's that much value in doing so. Right? So if I call somebody a racist, if the next thing they do that we talk about on this show is something that is not racist, then does it matter if he is, in fact, racist? You understand what I'm saying? Like, this broad classification as to whether or not somebody is or is not a racist is not what matters. What you deal with are the things that these people actually do. Reality is, if we were in a place where we were firing people just because they were racist, unemployment rate in this country would be sky high. Like, simply being a racist is not a fireable offense. We got too many of them. There's too much racism. There's a guy, Shady made a face when I said that.
We got too many of them. It's too widespread.
It is too widespread. Like, let me tell you something that's fascinating. There's a professor, I think his name is Edward Bonilla Silva at Duke. And I haven't read this all the way. I need to finish it, but he's got a book called Racism Without Racists. And what he says is that we talk about racism as this big force so we can always acknowledge its presence, but when it's time to point to somebody actually being a racist, nobody can ever find one. Like, it's all this racism until you're actually talking about somebody. Then it's every reason why that person couldn't be racist. And so I was doing Around the Horn, and we decided not to talk about the Draymond thing, but as we're going back and forth, everybody I was on there with was just really concerned with how unfair it would be, the idea of calling Dolan a racist. I'm like, okay, I hear you, but I'm not about to say he's not a racist either. We got enough evidence to indicate that's a silly assumption to make of a stranger. Everybody seems so uncomfortable with that idea of not just automatically assuming that the white person isn't racist. No. That's not how that goes for me. But that's the thing. It doesn't matter to me, quote unquote, whether you are a racist. So, for example, I have a very good friend of mine from graduate school. He's in that fraternity, the Kappa Alpha fraternity. Shannon, it's kind of like your fraternity, except it's nothing like your fraternity.
Right.
And they're the ones that wear like the Confederate garb for their balls and all that stuff like that. He's a real good friend of mine. Is he a racist? I don't know. Like, our interactions are what our interactions would be. He's never said anything around me that will wind up being problematic, whatever it is. You don't know him. So I can tell you that his fraternity dresses up in Confederate suits to go party. And your assumption probably is that he's a racist. It doesn't matter. Like, this broad classification of whether somebody is or is not a racist does not actually matter. We got a big old macro issue, and we can deal with these things a little bit at a time, but I don't get much value out of saying someone is or is not a racist. I just don't. Like with Donald Sterling, right? Is Donald Sterling a racist? Yeah, he is. The problem isn't that he's a racist. The problem is he brought his racism with him to work. If you're not a racist, and you bring your racism with you to work, it's the same problem as it was with Donald Sterling. You're just not going to get anywhere out here accusing people of being a racist. And guess what? You're not getting anywhere with me denying that you're a racist. All we're going to work with is what it is that you have or have not done. And with Jim Dolan, even if he's a jerk without being a racist, he's still a jerk. And the part that has the functional value is actually being a jerk, regardless of the motivation.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
All guests join us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line, just like our next guest. He covers the NBA for us here at ESPN. His name is Tom Haberstroh. Now, Tom, you're a guy that's talked a lot and written a lot about rest and the need for it for NBA players. The rest of us are saying LeBron James is playing too much. The Cavaliers and LeBron are like, nah, he's good. Where do you come down on this?
Well, I think he's not good. I don't think he's seeing this probably from a macro level of what he needs to do to get prepared for June. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers haven't played good basketball. And Tyronn Lue said the other day that he's bullheaded about playing. LeBron James is bullheaded about playing and trying to get the team back on track. But I really don't think the first seed in the East matters. LeBron James has won a championship without being the number one seed. He's won it being the number one seed. Home court advantage in Game 7 last year, you saw in the finals, didn't really matter all that much. I don't think they need to press so hard in maintaining that number one seed. I think they need to make sure that LeBron at age 32, playing already more minutes than Larry Bird, Allen Iverson, Magic Johnson, Steve Nash in their entire careers, Andre Miller, I think they have to be very careful here because LeBron wants to play. Like, I think he, with Kevin Love being injured, a guy who probably shouldn't have played in that back-to-back the other day when Tyronn Lue said in Indiana, he's going to give those guys a day off. And instead, the three guys, Kyrie, Kevin Love, and LeBron said, no, we're good to go. And they all play. And Kevin Love, a couple days later, they find out that he has a loose bodies in his knee. And I'm not saying that back-to-back is what caused it, but it certainly aggravated it in some way, and it's not good that he's out for 6 weeks. So that's a kind of cautionary tale for LeBron, is fighting through these injuries and toughing it out. In the end, I'm not so sure it's worth it.
Are you surprised that he's been as durable as he's been over these 14 years? Because I was thinking about this. We rarely even hear about off-season surgeries for LeBron.
No, I don't think he's ever had a serious injury in his NBA career. And look, the guy built a cryotherapy chamber. I don't know if you've ever done those, but it's like you basically have a freezer that's like a negative 100 degrees Celsius, this chamber that's supposed to like freeze all your muscles and help kind of recover. He built one, or he installed one of those in his house because it was just such a pain for him to go all the way down to the arena to get it. And only only a few teams in the NBA have this kind of technology, and he put one in his house. I've heard estimates that he spends $1 million of personal money on recovery and tech and just all that stuff on his own body. So this guy invests a ton of money, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of this preventative stuff, preventing injury, is a huge thing in the NBA, and that's why you see these DNP rests, Bomani. There have been 69 DNP rests, meaning healthy scratches where guys could feasibly play, but the coaches or the medical staff say, you know what, we're going to give you the night off, a healthy scratch. Last year there were 40 at this point, which means that's 73% increase since last year. And that's a big worry for Adam Silver and the rest of the NBA. If you got these games on Thursday night, TNT, or Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, ABC, and LeBron has to sit just because he's healthy, but he just doesn't want to hurt himself, that's a bad look for the NBA.
All right, talking to Tom Haberstroh of ESPN. Switching gears a bit, the All-Star game is here. This is, earlier we talked about, who got voted in, and people complain a lot about the process. But what's the role you think the social media is playing in this?
So we got a tip, Baxter Holmes and I at ESPN, we got a tip that Kawhi Leonard's All-Star votes were kind of wacky online. They were fishy. There were a lot of Twitter votes coming in for Kawhi Leonard. And as you know, Kawhi Leonard's not out there campaigning for himself, right? Like, he's not out on Twitter every day doing the whole thing that Joel Embiid, right? He's not doing that. Turns out that there was a guy from Macedonia who's building Twitter bots to retweet any vote for Kawhi Leonard and hashtag NBA vote 10 times. So every single time someone voted for Kawhi Leonard, it was retweeted 10 times by these bots from a fan in Macedonia. And the reason why this is super interesting is because we also received a tip that Donald Trump's campaign digital director, the guy who essentially built this huge network of news to send directly to Facebook, people's Facebook feeds, he's from San Antonio. He got a basketball scholarship at UTSA, San Antonio, and he's a huge Spurs fan. So we kind of dug into this story and to see if this guy was behind it. He denies it, and we believe him, but this guy, huge Spurs fan, knows exactly that these social media votes, they are totally vulnerable to hacking, to these Twitter bots. And the NBA, I guess, so far has done a pretty good job screening these votes, but this is all that fake news stuff, right? Like fake Twitter votes getting Kawhi Leonard in the All-Star game. This is really, really interesting stuff.
All right, talking to Tom Haberstroh of ESPN, also the guy behind the social stuff for Trump. I read a story about that. It's fascinating and scary all at one time, what they can come up with off your Facebook likes.
Oh, yeah. So this is the digital age that we live in, right? So this is really, really interesting, fascinating, and at times very, very scary. And that's why the NBA going into the social media pool for these votes, it's definitely vulnerable to hacking. And it's something you're probably going to have to watch over the next couple of years, is whether sports really want to get into this world.
All right, talking to Tom Haberstroh of ESPN. All right, they're telling me here that maybe, just maybe, Shane Battier is going to get a job with the Miami front office?
Yeah, I had heard about this about a week ago. Shane Battier was going to join an NBA front office, and they announced today, Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, and the Arisons announced that Shane Battier is joining the Heat as the director of basketball development and analytics. And the thing that sticks out to me here is most of analytics guys, they're not former players. That the analytics portion in that title is fascinating to me because, as you know, Bomani, a lot of the players, they don't want to hear any of that stuff. They don't want to hear that A word. And for Shane Battier to be hired into an analytics position, I think that's very interesting in terms of bridging that gap. So it's not like people who look like me telling them about analytics. It's guys who played the game, and it's very rare to see a guy who played the game be well-versed in this stuff and be able to communicate it. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does with Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley in that role. I think he's going to succeed, but it's very rare to see a former player devote himself into that job.
Well, see, I also think that's interesting because, yes, he is a former player, and you say they want to hear from a former player, not from a guy like you. But part of the appeal to Shane Battier for a lot of media members is that he's a lot like guys like you and me, as opposed to being like a quote-unquote basketball player. So I wonder how it goes over coming from that guy.
Yeah, he's getting his MBA right now as we speak from Duke. And so this guy he's going to have the degrees to back it up. He's not just going to have what we call in basketball, a PhD in basketball. Like it's not just that. He is going to be well-versed in the business side and just the statistical side. And he was lecturing me about stats for a long time, and he got LeBron James looking at stat sheets about Carmelo Anthony's tendencies and how to guard him left or right, what positions on the floor, what he likes to do on the court. A lot of that stat stuff, he got LeBron to listen to it, and if you can get LeBron to listen to it, I think you can get a lot of different players with that one pitch. Hey, LeBron looks at this stuff, man. You should too.
On a different day, we can talk about how having an MBA is not the degree that makes me believe you know a damn thing about anything in this world whatsoever, other than how you got in the first place. I admit I get a little bit obnoxious about them damn MBAs.
I hear you. I didn't make up the term. I'm just repeating what other people say.
Yeah, man, I got you. Sorry, it's the economist in me. I had to go all intellectual snob on him. Tom Haberstroh, check about covering the NBA. You gonna be in New Orleans this weekend?
I am not. I got a newborn I got to attend to. I would be straight headed to divorce if I left after 2 weeks of a newborn to go to New Orleans. Come on, Bomani.
I mean, just check it, man. But hey, congratulations on that. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bomani.
The 2017 NBA All-Star Game. DeRozan, Kyrie, and LeBron lead the Eastern Stars into New Orleans.
Butler throws it down with two hands. Wow. Kyrie Irving. James splits a double, drives and throws it home.
To face the West, led by Kawhi, Durant, and Curry.
James Harden stirring it up. Durant throws it down. Nothing but net. Steph Curry.
Coverage begins Sunday at 7:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
You saw what happened to in the state of North Carolina, right? You saw that where they had to rule, about the bathroom, and they NCAA and all the folks like, look, man, we ain't gonna be able to do stuff down there with y'all. Like, it's not gonna happen as long as y'all got that rule. NCAA said they're not gonna be back until the next decade.
What do we have going on this weekend? The NBA All-Star Game.
That's right. It was supposed to be, great call, supposed to be in Charlotte. Nope, it's going to be in New Orleans. Nope, people said, we pulling this money out of here. I told you the thing with Charlotte that got lost in this, because remember, Michael Jordan put something out saying, no, we don't like this law. And I was like, wow, surprised to see Mike say something political. But what you forget about Mike is they got events in that arena when basketball isn't being played, like concerts. And they were losing out on that concert money at whatever that is. It's still Time Warner Cable, whatever they call it now. But they were missing out on concert money at that arena. They're like, oh, no, we're not going to have that. So we've seen this, that somehow, with these laws, sports can be used to kind of move the way that these states handle things. Now, the state of Texas apparently is trying to push through a law that seems very similar to the North Carolina one. It says that you'll be required to use the bathroom that corresponds to the sex listed on your birth certificate, right? So it's kind of same as that law. An NFL spokesman sent an email that said, if a proposal that is discriminatory or inconsistent with our values were to become law in Texas, that would certainly be a factor considered when thinking about awarding future events. And the NFL really only got one event to award. It is the Super Bowl. Like, that's what they have to award. So you got Houston, you got Dallas. Houston just had a Super Bowl. Jerry's got that stadium there. They want to have Super Bowls. Like, that's what they're here for. Okay, cool. The league is saying y'all might want to be careful about this. And understand, stuff like this has happened with the NFL for a while. Let us not forget, or let us go back to the early 1990s where Phoenix had a Super Bowl, and then they did not because they would not enact a Martin Luther King holiday, which, by the way, is a lot less impactful of a situation than you have with this bill about the bathrooms. Right? But anyway, they took that away from Phoenix because of that, and then eventually they changed the law in Arizona, and now Arizona has Super Bowls every now and then. The governor of Texas, however, he ain't about that back down. His name is Greg Abbott, and you got to understand, man, I'm from Texas, and one thing the Texans are not about is you telling them what to do. Just generally across the board, it is not a state where people are here for you telling them what to do. So here's what the governor has had to say about this. He was talking to Glenn Beck, and he said the NFL, quote, is walking on thin ice. Shannon, what does that mean? Like, does the governor of Texas have some powers over the NFL that I'm unaware of?
Right, is that a don't mess with Texas?
Yeah, like what are you talking? Like, what are you going to do? Send the army? You gonna send the Texas Rangers to Park Avenue or something?
What, Texas going to succeed from the NFL?
Be careful. Be careful. Somebody's always a half step away from trying to do that. Just so you know. Like, they ain't a whole... the notion of secession in Texas is not really a joke to that many people. Anyway, he goes on further. He says, for some low-level NFL advisor to come out and say that they are going to micromanage and try to dictate to the state of Texas what types of policies we're going to pass in our state, that's unacceptable. We don't care what the NFL thinks, and certainly what their political policies are, because they are not a political arm of the state of Texas or the United States of America. They need to learn their place in the United States, which is to govern football, not politics. Fool, they govern football, and they govern where the Super Bowl goes, and they telling you they ain't gonna give you the Super Bowl if you keep this up. Like, they're walking on thin ice. No. Like, if you don't care about the Super Bowl being in the state of Texas, that's fine, right? Like, that's on you. That's not something for you to be concerned with. Okay, that's whatever. You gonna come out here and threaten them? Like, I'm being serious. What are you threatening them with? Like, what are you, governor of the state of Texas, going to do to Roger Goodell? Because, look, all Roger's got to say is, you got 2 teams in Texas. We got 30 teams in the league. All of them would love to host a Super Bowl. And we got enough teams that we can go around and we can find places. And look, NFL don't even need it to be warm anymore to have a Super Bowl. I think I looked it up, Shannon. I think they're having the Super Bowl next year in Minnesota. Minnesota. They don't even need it to be warm in the places these days.
Minnesota next year. Detroit is upgrading to Ford Field so they can host another Super Bowl.
Oh, gosh. Let me know those years so I can remember not to go. But anyway, like, these things are happening. This cat's out here like, yeah, you ain't going to tell us what to do. Cool. You're not going to get the Super Bowl. Now, what I wonder is, how'd this go over with Jerry Jones when he hears this dude talking all this noise? He's like, nah, bro, you need to fall back. Or how'd it go with Bob McNair? Like, I don't know how politically connected Jerry Jones is. I'm sure Jerry knows guys, but I don't know, like, how much he cares about those things. Yo, Bob McNair, like, he's on the phone with those dudes. He's in those circles. Bob McNair probably called that governor and was like, dog, if you don't sit down and be quiet so we can all come out here and get this money. Like, I understand you all concerned about these bathrooms right now, and that's cool. I might care a little bit, but you know what I care a lot more about? Getting this money. Will you be quiet so we can go out here and we can get this money? You're going to tell Roger Goodell what to do. Good luck with that, buddy.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
So I talked a bit about Draymond Green and him saying that he thought that Jim Dolan had a slave master mentality. I thought he was incorrect when he said that, but I didn't really find it to necessarily be that terribly offensive. Our guest now, I believe he feels a little bit differently than I do. You may have heard him filling in on a wonderful week of The Right Time in late August. His name is Will Cain. Now, Will, what is your take on Draymond?
First of all, do you want to go ahead and should we lay out for the audience that I'm not PFT commenter? I don't want to ruin the bit. I don't want to ruin the bit, but
you got a better voice.
This is real. My thing on Draymond is this, okay? And you and I went back and forth on Twitter a little bit, and I laid it out on First Take earlier today. But I found that Draymond's comments equating James Dolan to a slave master mentality was not only wrong-headed, but that it diminished very serious issues when it came to not only the legacy of slavery, but racism, Draymond himself, and even the very trivial issue of Charles Oakley being kicked out of Madison Square Garden. I think when you take something that important like slavery and equate it to the bickering between millionaires and billionaires, what you have done is managed to diminish everything.
Well, okay, so I asked you about that because I found it to be odd that on one hand you're saying that he minimized the issue of slavery and then also said he minimized the issue with Jim Dolan. I'm like, well, wait a minute. You just put these things in the same sentence and put them next to each other. Like, I felt like if you're putting them in the same place, you were kind of guilty of the same minimization. What would you say in response?
Well, all I was doing was echoing Draymond. In fact, I don't think you and I disagreed on that. He's the one that put those two things together. By me saying you've put these two things together and somehow diminished both, I'm only echoing back what you said and then judging the conclusion.
Yeah, see, I think part of it I think is interesting is I don't think, we're talking to Will Cain, I don't think it necessarily minimized what he had to say in the first place about Dolan, because I think the point that he made before he compared it to a slave owner's mentality, which I am with you on, I don't think is correct, but the point he made still stands up. Like, I feel it's kind of disingenuous when people make a good point and then they say something afterwards that you don't like, and then you say, well, it just minimized the first point. We don't have to let it minimize the first point, do we? Like, we could focus on the first point, but I think it makes for better business for us to talk about the other one.
No, I don't think so. Because if I get beyond his invocation of slavery and judge his statements, so he judged Dolan. He said that James Dolan was happy to indulge Charles Oakley's aggressiveness, his ability to take on opponents when it worked in James Dolan's favor, when he worked for James Dolan. But then that when he doesn't, that James Dolan has thin skin, I find that obvious. A, has nothing to do with racism or slavery, and B, is obvious. You are a bigger deal around here than me, Bomani. So maybe that rule applies to you here. It doesn't apply to me, and I can't find the place of employment where when you are a former employee and you publicly criticize your former business and then you show up to their place of work and berate them, that they would not escort you out. I can't imagine where that wouldn't be the course of events.
Well, see, where I think it's interesting is I have not seen it confirmed that he ever actually berated James Dolan when he showed up there. See, to me, part of where this gets to be interesting, like where the race thing comes up, and you'll never be able to get pinpoint it, right? But the fear that Jim Dolan had at the idea of Charles Oakley sitting behind him, like him being so petrified, like Oakley is rough, but Oakley ain't crazy. He's not about to run up on Jim Dolan. And that's the one where I was just like, why are you so afraid? Like, I think that there's a thing with NBA players where they feel like they're not respected by their owners, and the owners have told them this basically in collective bargaining over and over again. And I think they have a certain sensitivity to the idea that they go out and they trade on their bodies for these owners, and the owners still look at them as basically manual laborers. Because the thing I think we both agree makes this weird, they do manual labor, but they also get paid executive level prices, and they want to be treated more like executives, but they feel like they're treated like manual laborers. Like, can you see there somewhat how Draymond Green could wind up making that comparison, even though I think it's incorrect?
No, because I think it's characteristic of any employer-employee relationship, regardless of manual labor or executive, and regardless of race.
Right, but these aren't just regular employees, are they? Like, I think we'd have to acknowledge there's a difference between these employees and, like, me and you.
How is it different?
I would say it's different because they are far more important to the operation that we actually have there. Like, Draymond Green is far rarer at his job than I am, and way rarer than you. Just messing with you. But he's much rarer at his job. LeBron James, for example, is not a worker like me and you are. That's just how that goes. Like, I think it's ridiculous to look at somebody like Draymond Green as simply being an employee when we know at different jobs not everybody's just an employee.
So just to keep the record straight, I think we are both rarities in our own individual ways around here.
Yeah, but yeah, but you know, it's funny. On a different day, we're going to have to talk about that because I don't think you're quite as rare as you are more outspoken than others.
No. We can have that discussion. We can have it on or off the air if you want, but I feel confident in my rarity around here.
I mean, let's be real. You are rare. Like, even if it's just an ideological thing, you are certainly rare. That's part of why I have you here. I'm
not establishing that, Bomani, as a positive or negative. I'm not suggesting I'm a rare gem around here. I might be a rare turd for the people listening. It doesn't matter, but I promise you I'm rare.
We're talking to Will Cain of ESPN. Now, one thing I want to ask you about is you talked about Draymond minimizing the legacy of slavery. And this is something that I find generally annoying. So I want to be clear that I hope I'm not doing this to you if I have this wrong, but I find that there are more discussions about how slavery is being minimized when people make references to it that folks don't like. But I find that societally, generally speaking, we minimize slavery. They're taking it out of school books. You and I are both from Texas. You know that's going on there. And people complain more about the minimizing of slavery when somebody mentions it in conversation than the fact that we're a nation that knows nothing about slavery. So I'm curious, like, what do you think is the importance and the legacy of slavery in the 21st century?
So I think this is a fascinating conversation and one I'm excited to have with you. In this, I think there's a certain school of thought that if you don't accept these parameters of ideas, then somehow you don't acknowledge A, slavery, B, the legacy of slavery, and C, institutional racism throughout our country. I just simply reject that premise. First of all, if I don't believe, and we don't have to go down into the policy weeds of racial politics, but if I don't believe in reparations, or if I have trouble, many people often talk about my white privilege. And if I don't atone for my white privilege in some way, that doesn't mean that I don't recognize the role of slavery in our nation's history and its present-day role in racial relations. I can do all that and still see things that you and I might disagree on as cures to these societal ills. But it's as though if I don't accept this Cracker Jack box set of ideas, and I don't tick off all the box from 1 to 10, then, well, my goodness, I just don't recognize the legacy of slavery in this country or institutional racism.
Right, but I asked you what the legacy was, and you didn't answer. Like, you told me all that stuff.
Oh, I'll tell you. Legacy of slavery has to do, it still is embedded in our judicial system. It's still embedded in our criminal justice laws. It is most certainly embedded in our nation's education system. And these are all places that not just my words, which my words are really part of my job, but my personal life as well has been dedicated to some extent in looking at and addressing, not just in my actions, but in the way I live my life. I'm sorry that I'm doing that. Sometimes running your own personal, this is like I have black friends argument, right? Running your own personal life out there is not something I like to do, but it's constantly, I receive the criticism of I don't know how to identify, and I would never hold out that I do. I'm not black. I can't walk in your shoes, but I know that race relationships is a twofold game. It takes black and white, and my life might not be as lily white as everyone wants to believe.
Well, here, and we're talking to Will Cain, and see, this is what I think is interesting there is where you say that you can see the legacy of slavery in our criminal justice system in all these different places, while at the same time not acknowledging the existence of white privilege seems to be a bit confusing to me, because to me, and maybe it's just a semantic argument, but if you can see how these other things are kind of stacked in ways that are against black and brown people, by logical extension, you could see how good it is to be white, that you don't have to deal with those same things. So I'm curious as to why you reject the idea of white privilege, while saying that these institutional structures that are in play do affect people's lives as such.
Okay, so here's the answer, Bomani. It's because my ultimate philosophical principle is that of individualism and agency. So if I am even the beneficiary of something, but I did nothing to either earn or nothing to contribute to that ill, why is it constantly put back on the table in front of me? I believe that the way for human beings to treat each other is to treat each other as individuals, not groups. And the way that the criminal justice system solves that ill is to hold more fast to that ideal, hold more fast to that principle, not adjust as though we can treat people as groups and make broad sweeping societal changes from group orientations, but rather hold more true to treating us each as individuals.
Right. And you know what I think that comes down to, and we're talking to Will Cain of ESPN, is that while you, and I can only take your word on it, obviously, but where you are saying that you evaluate people as individuals, it is worth noting when you talk about the outcomes for individuals, and then when you put those individuals together to make group conclusions, is that black people are so often punished for being, quote unquote, behind for so many, for all these different reasons, while ignoring all these other things that we talked about that contribute to a lot of people's individual lives. And so while you could say, yes, I'm an individual, as an individual, you get to live more of an individual life because of the existence of white privilege. Like when you say things, it is Will Cain saying it. When I come on here and say things, it is Bomani and these black people and what they happen to say at the same time. Like that's where, to me, the privilege absolutely comes up. So it's not your fault necessarily that you are the recipient of said privilege, but even as an individual, it doesn't change the fact that your individual path is positively affected by the fact that you don't have to deal with some of the hell that comes from not being a white man.
So I want to say this both ways. I'm sure everything you just said is true, but over here, on my side of this equation, it's not exactly the most lily rose path you're talking about. Oh, it's not as though I promise you, when I open up my Twitter or I take calls or I do whatever, it isn't just Will Cain, you're an idiot, but Will Cain and your white privilege and people like you are all the problem. I'm grouped as well.
Oh, I agree. Your group, I would tell you, and I'm not denying, because grouping is something that can certainly happen in all places, but I do think that as black men, it does get to be a little bit offensive when the white dude tells you, you don't know how hard we got it. Nah, bro, we got an idea, Jack. We have an idea.
Don't worry, I wouldn't put it on the same par.
I will say this, though. My buddy Mark Lamont Hill, who does a lot of work on cable news, he said that there was one person who he disagreed with that he liked talking about these things with on television, and he said it was Will Cain, and he said because he felt that you were sincere in your arguments, you wanted to have a legitimate discussion. And I'll be damned, that actually happened here. No, but seriously, I think this is productive. Well, I think that this was good, and in spite of the fact that you're from Dallas, I appreciate you coming on.
Well, you and I don't have a relationship. We've tweeted back and forth a few times. We had one conversation when you called into the wonderful week when I hosted your show.
Yes.
But I'll tell you this, I have a ton of respect for Mark. I reflect that respect back to him. He's one of my favorite. And if you and I can set off on that same path of mutual respect, but still plenty of disagreement, I'll be happy to see that's the case.
There you go. And I already unblocked you on Twitter. We're making steps. That's Will Cain of ESPN. Thanks so much for joining us, man. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Scott Burnside, ESPN.com here on the latest edition of Hockey Today, the podcast. We catch up with breaking news in Montreal with a coaching change there, and hear from Pat Maroon of the Edmonton Oilers and Jason Chimera of the New York Islanders.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
By the way, I thought it went really well with Will. I thought it went very well with Will. And see, the thing I want you guys to understand is I think a lot of y'all thought me and Will were going to get on here and have a fight. I'm like, nah, I talked to Will beforehand. I'm like, look, I'm not looking for a fight. And he's like, is that a warning? I say, no. I just want you to know that I'm not in this for a spectacle. Like, if we're going to do this, we're going to have a level of conversation. I know you guys are a little bit apprehensive because Will was wilding out that week that he filled in for me and I was not here. But, see, we can do that. And it's funny, Shannon, when I have a white man like Will who talk like Will on here, don't nobody tell me to stick to sports. You notice that?
Funny how that works.
Yeah, I say, ain't no stick to sports. I got the right-wing white man on here. They're like, oh, okay, cool. No, this sounds a little bit more like sports. 888-729-3776. It's on Stephen in Georgia. Stephen, thanks for calling the right time.
Hey, Bomani, I was just going to share with you that what a lot of people don't like to admit, white guys especially, is that the world is probably still very much like that old Eddie Murphy skit from Saturday Night Live, where you kind of walk in and when no one's looking, they give you the paper, you know. The world's just like that if you're a white man, and, you know, are they ready to admit that and have it change? Probably not.
Yeah, they just take it, man. Just take it. Just take it.
Yeah. It's literally how it is. I mean, I'm a white guy. I'm going to tell you right now, I've walked into a store and, like, been short a nickel or a dime or something. Like, that's all right. You know, it's just that way. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, let me tell you, man, I appreciate the call, Steven. This is the day, I'll tell you for me, the day that I realized that, like, white privilege was, like, a thing. I mean, I kind of knew it, but it really got me. I'll never forget this. One of my good friends, man, my buddy Kirk, he lives in D.C. Kirk, about the whitest white man I know, right? Kirk is from Oroville, California. He's blonde hair, blue-eyed German. His family is all cops and Marines and everything. One of my single best friends in the world, right? We met in grad school. We get along fantastically. So I remember one day, and the reason I rock with Kirk is, like, everybody's got, like, the white friend or whatever, but, like, when you're a black person that gets in these bougie circles and you hang out with white people, you tend to do all the stuff the white guys do, right? Like, you go to the bars that the white guys go to, you hang out at all the same spots they do. I told him once, I'm like, nah, man, if you go hang with me, you're going to be out here doing this black stuff with me. You're going to be hanging out with me and my black friends, because I'm always, you know, you wind up the one black dude around the white. Nah. I took him to Stars on Crayons and Rosecrans. Give me Crenshaw Rosecrans. We had a ball. Like, that's when I realized, okay. So one day he showed up at my house. The front seat in his car wasn't working. His registration, I think, was expired. And I think his insurance was out too, right? He was on the way to the house. He wound up getting pulled over. So it's me and a bunch of white dudes from a bunch of black dudes from Southern California. He walked in and told us all the things that were wrong with his car, and he got pulled over for them. And after he finished telling us, we're all looking at him like, and they let you drive here? Right? We were flummoxed, right? Like, we had no beef with him, but we were just like, really, all those things happen and they let you get in the car and drive here? And we just looked at each other, and he looked at us like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I don't quite. Like, it's these things that I find to be mind-blowing. And there's, like, those little sorts of things that come up. Nah, man, you can't acknowledge that racism does exist and then act like you're not doing better because you don't have to deal with the racism. Because, like, with the Chris Rock line, a single one of y'all trading places with me, and I'm rich. Like, I'm rich enough now where I can use that line and I can give it to you, right? Because that rich don't mean nothing if they pull me over. That rich don't mean nothing if I don't have some clear identifier of how rich I am, right? But anyway, I thought you'd find that to be a funny story. And those of you who didn't, maybe I should have had Will Cain on here with me when I told it, because then you'd be willing to listen. 888-729-3776. Let's talk to Pete in Maryland. Pete, thanks for calling the right time.
Hey, how you doing, Bomani?
Doing all right.
First I want to commend you for not totally losing your mind when Will Cain was on there, because someone that doesn't acknowledge – I'm going to tell you what white privilege is. You walk into a department store, you're a suspect. Will Cain walks into a department store, he's a customer.
No, I mean, I will say this, and I appreciate the call. I'm not a suspect in every department store that I walk in. But I am in some of them. Like, I am in some of them. But, like, those aren't the things that matter. Like, those are kind of like, in a lot of ways, like the little things. It's bigger things when this stuff happens to come up. But, like, I really appreciate Will coming on here, because I don't agree with Will about that much. But I found him to be sincere in his arguments, which I know many of you did not find him to be the last time that he came on. But I found him to be sincere in his arguments, even if I disagreed with a lot of them. But I guess, Shannon, that one was a little weird because he and I actually kind of agreed on a lot when it came to Draymond, which I don't think anybody expected.
No, neither did he.
I be fooling him, don't I? Not him. I be getting him every now and then. Like, wait a minute, though. What? I don't know how that. Wait, what?
You can't be upset about disagreeing with him if you already agree with him.
That's right. That's almost what y'all call that Inception. One of those things.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
We got my man Clinton Yates in studio. Check him out on the Morning Roast. That's Sunday mornings, 9 to 12.
Yeah, man.
Right. You're on it with Dominique Foxworth and Mina Kimes. Also, check him out at the Undefeated.com. Also, check him out at a barbershop near you in Miami, because I feel like that's the next place you got to go to.
You ain't got to be mad because I got hair, Bo. You ain't got to be mad at me.
Well, hold on. To be clear, when my hairline started looking like yours is when I gave up.
Hey, man. Listen,
like, I could have hair.
I haven't cut it since the election. Why you think?
Just saying.
Why you think?
I'm just saying, man. Well, look, it's good to have you here. Just briefly, you heard us. We had Will Cain on a little bit. We're talking about Draymond and the slavery reference. And this is my question. And what do you feel about this? Because people get so mad at any intimation of slavery, and I feel like whenever someone intimates slavery, it's always wrong. And then if you're right, the subject gets changed. Not that Will did that, but that's how I feel it happens in the macro.
The main reason is because for a lot of white people specifically, when you think about what slavery is, where you go to is whips, chains, abuse, yelling, N-bombs. You hear all that. You don't think about the economic position people are put in. You don't think about the psychological tax of what is put in. And so when Draymond says that about slave masters, I think what his point is there is, listen, Oakley does not work for the team. He is not actually Dolan's employee. If he, as a paying customer in America, wants to show up and yell at the owner, that should be his right. Now, their personal relationship is what led to this circumstance, but to say that it's a typical employer-employee relationship is false. It doesn't even make sense because, hello, he ain't cashing, he's not cashing those checks from him anymore. He should have as much right to go there and be mad as he wants to. Right. The fact that he's sent goons after him, that's what pissed Oakley off.
Yeah, and I think the other level, though, where this gets interesting is when you feel like someone thinks that you are beneath them. Because the one thing we teach people in America is you get that money and then you get to rise, you get to ascend. Right. These cats wind up getting all this money and then wind up dealing with owners and very often realize this guy actually does feel like I am beneath him. And I feel like the part when people start making these references to slavery, it's more hierarchy than anything else. And it's a hierarchy that goes beyond an org chart. Like, even if you think that you are above somebody because you are their boss, it doesn't mean you necessarily think that that person is beneath you. And I think a lot of NBA players feel like their owners believe that they are beneath them.
I agree. And that also gets to the point about billionaires fighting millionaires, where it's not just about the specific amount of money, it's about the ratio they're making versus what they feel that they're worth. And that's where the slavery comparison again becomes apt. Slavery wasn't just about the horrors of forcing people to work for no money and abusing and tearing up families. It was about the fact that the wealth that built this country was actually taken away from people, and therefore their agency later on down the line was compromised. And so for me, is it a long jump? Absolutely. But that's why he's saying mentality and not specifically going out and calling Dolan a racist or necessarily saying he's driving slaves. He's saying where that is rooted in is from an obvious place in American history that we can all point to.
Yeah, we're talking about man Clinton Yates of the Morning Roast on ESPN Radio, and also check him out at the Undefeated.com. And one thing I thought about with this is, like, you know what it's like when you're talking to like a child and all of a sudden the child says something to you and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. You're not supposed to talk to me like that. As a black person, that happens more than you would expect when you talk to white people of various stripes. They're like, hey, wait a minute now. I work too hard to take this off of you. Like, the notion of black and brown people being beneath white people, it's like really baked in ways that people don't realize, but it's so baked in that they think it's normal. Therefore, when someone says something about it, they're like, I don't understand what the big deal is. You can vote.
Absolutely. And you talked to Will about what the lasting legacies of slavery are. One of the things he did mention, like I said before, was money. You go to that new Smithsonian Museum in D.C., and they show you the exact amount of money that a lot of these white farmers made off of cotton. It's in the billions, like the tens of billions, like the 50, 60, 70 billions. That's one thing. But the other thing is this concept that supremacy is what makes sense. The notion that, whoa. Everything at this point now from here forward becomes a stay-in-your-place argument, effectively. And that's what all of this stuff against Oakley effectively is. It's a long-winded form of stay-in-your-place. Because, again, he's a paying customer to a public event. He should be allowed to show up and say whatever he wants. If I showed up and started screaming at Dolan at the top of my lungs, people would just be like, hey, you're a jerk. But they certainly wouldn't send 15 guys after me to try to send me out. Of course, I am not a man of the stature of Oakley. But, again, supremacy is another long-lasting legacy that people have, as you've said, simply ingrained to understand is normal. It ain't like that, Jack.
Well, here's the underrated part of that Dolan story to me. We still have no idea where the beef started. Right, like all of this has happened. No one's gotten to the bottom of what is Jim Dolan's problem with Charles Oakley. Because the way Oakley tells it, he has no idea where this came from, but Dolan hasn't talked to him in years. I want to know where this started from.
I've heard him on a couple things, and he said it's come down to stuff like, promotional events gone wrong, things he tried to do with the team when he showed up. Basic sort of what I would presume to be typical things that former players deal with teams that they once played for. But because Oakley's persona is so outsized and because he has the physical advantage of potentially even in the field with one fist or finger to your forehead, it exacerbates things a lot. And like you said before in the show, Dolan was just scared. He was shook and he wasn't going to be showed up at his own place, so he bounced him.
All right, we're talking to Clinton Yates of the Undefeated. Go switch gears a little bit since I got you here. I have a joke that I can't tell. I don't think I'll be able to tell next season that I've been telling in basketball season for the longest. The Washington Wizards have not won 50 games in my life. I'm 36 years old. They have not won 50 games in my life. They will probably win 50 games this year. Is DC getting on board? Because I met a TV exec once who said the thing with the Wizards is you can see it in the ratings. Whenever they give any cause for optimism, people want to be there. Then they get their hearts crushed and they run away.
That's fine. And I at this point, that's exactly what it is. I'm the same age you are. Look, I've been there with the Doug Overton teams in the back in the day. All these old squads, back when they were Les Boulay, playing in Landover, Maryland. The Wizards this year are for real. And what I don't know, though, is whether or not Wizards fans are more concerned about this team getting better or this team winning awards. The John Wall MVP, the John Wall's the best guy in the East, all of this foolishness is what fans are so concerned about. You know what I care about? Get to the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't care if nobody wins an award. I don't need Scotty Brooks to win anything. I don't need John Wall to be in an All-Star game. I don't need Bradley Beal to get on there if somebody else gets caught. I do not care about the individual accolades of each player on that team. As a fan of that team for my whole life, I just want them to win. But everybody's so concerned about this national respect thing. We ain't getting enough games on national television. Ain't nobody talking about us on, The Jump or NBA Countdown or whatever. I don't care. They ain't won nothing. There's no reason to talk about them until they get to that point. Right now, though, they look good. I mean, Otto Porter is banging.
I do feel like this, though, right? Like, I hear what you're saying and everything. You want to get the Eastern Conference Finals. I feel like kind of slow your roll. You're getting a little bit greedy right now.
Yeah.
You're getting a little greedy. Why can't you just be happy that Randy Whitman isn't the coach? Because I don't think this guy Brooks is a great coach. But holy smokes, man, he is John Wooden next to Randy Whitman.
It's amazing, too, because they're scoring so many points. They're scoring more points than any of those Thunder teams ever scored, which is incredible considering the lineup that they have. And they got guys like Jason Smith out here dunking on people. They got rid of Humphreys, my boy, the secret weapon. I'm upset about that, but they found a way to make it happen. And I actually am quite proud of the way one Theodore Leonsis, the owner of that team, has actually managed to handle himself considering the way he normally gets involved, which is a little too much. They're all right now, man. I like it.
How did that go with you guys? You guys seem to like Abe a lot. Rest in peace when Abe was here. You guys seem to like Abe a lot. Then you got Ted, and you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, Ted is the kind of guy who just wants to make sure that people like his team as much as they like a certain other team in that town. So he and that other owner seem to be constantly in a measuring battle, if we shall say. And so the fact that the other owner gets all the headlines is something that routinely bothers Mr. Leonsis, even though he has two teams.
Yes.
So this is a constant war in D.C. on a regular basis.
But one of the teams is the hockey team, and the other guy owns, the city's team.
Exactly. He owns the football team. So there's no real way he's going to be able to make up for it, no matter how many arena football teams he buys to play in the Verizon Center. They're never going to take up the market share.
Although it's funny, the Washington football team is the city team, kind of, right? Because there's this big demographic of Cowboys fans for very interesting reasons that I'd love to write a book
and
on.
Also, that's a whole other story. But also, I've always said this, D.C. is a basketball town when it comes to everything other than pro sports. So from the levels on up, you're talking about men's, you're talking about women's, you're talking about high school, college, all the way down. People care about football as fans, as far as what they participate in on a local level. Basketball is really the sport of D.C.
Thanks for listening to The Right Time Podcast. Please come back Monday for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
The NBA All-Star Game this Sunday.
Here's Curry behind the back. Half-court heave on its way. And he hits it!
Coverage begins Sunday at 7:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.